So I wonder if you have somebody in your life who you know is going to tell you the truth no matter what. Does this outfit make me look fat? You don't want to go on TV probably with that outfit. You're not really a great boss. You're not listening to the coworkers. You don't take constructive criticism very well. I don't think you should be dating that guy because I knew some of his former girlfriends, and he's a two-timing weasel, and honestly, he's kind of a chauvinistic pig. You should break this off before you get hurt. How many of you ever had this conversation with a daughter or sister? Okay, all right, don't show of hands. Because usually when you have that kind of conversation in love with somebody that you care about, the reaction isn't, oh, thank you. The reaction is usually, who do you think you are? Oh, yeah, well, I've got some things that I want to tell you about you. I remember when I was a freshman in college, and as some of us sometimes do, kind of got away from who I had been. And I remember the guy down the hall, who later became a roommate of 2 years, came to me and said, Scott, I know you read the Bible. I know you go to church. And I might not read it like you do. And I might be a very good churchgoer. But some of the things you've been saying and some of the ways you've been acting, you better go and read it again. Because what I'm seeing isn't what I think a Christian should be. And again, I'm not holier than thou. And he could have taken a 2x4 and hit me across the face with the kind of reaction I had. I mean, my first reaction was, get the heck out of here. And I was angry. But then it sunk in what he was saying to me, and I knew he was earnest about it. And I knew, honestly, he was right. I don't want to hear it, because it's painful to have somebody hold up a mirror to you and see the things you have convinced or rationalized or made excuses about yourself that have said, oh, this is okay, or this is all right. And just you keep moving the boundary a little bit further, a little goalpost a little bit further, a little bit further. And so we enter into today's texts. And I call this a sermon we don't want to hear, because God starts off talking to the prophet Ezekiel, and he says, go to my people and tell them, even though they're stubborn and obstinate and rebellious, who wants to be described by those adjectives? And tell them the truth about where they are. And the truth about Israel at the time was that they had become selfish, self-absorbed. They had forgotten their neighbors. They had not treated them with generosity or compassion. They looked into themselves, only themselves. They had become violent. There was a lot of bloodshed in their land, and they had become greedy. And God tells Ezekiel, go tell them those things. And I wonder if Ezekiel thought, these are my neighbors. Some of these people are my friends. And you ever hear the phrase, familiarity brings contempt? Well, we start to see it as Jesus goes to his hometown. Now, most of us, when we think about Jesus as this amazingly nice, compassionate human being who, when Jesus spoke, if he was on the hillside here, we would all just be like, oh, wow. But we don't often think about Jesus speaking as he goes back to his hometown. And at first the people are like, wow, this is amazing. And then somebody's like, hey, didn't this guy make a chair for us a couple years ago? Hey, didn't I grow up playing with him in the backyard? What's this whole thing about him going town to town? We hear like he's been kind of famous in Capernaum and in Bethsaida and all these other places. He's healing people. Why does it take him so long to come home? Was he too big for us? Has he outshone us? And isn't this Mary's kid? What kind of eldest son in Israel? This is a big deal. He's responsible for the care of his mother, and Joseph's not mentioned. What kind of son leaves his poor mother here to take care of the family business and stuff by himself? So this Mary's son isn't like, oh yeah, we know this guy, he's Mary's kid. It's more of an insult. Why aren't you here? And no mention of your father. Well, we all know how that story went. Mary saw an angel. People in the town probably talked. Joseph's his dad, but not really, adopted son. So the people turned from very positive to all of a sudden really angry at Jesus. In Luke's gospel, it tells us that his hometown folks were so upset with what Jesus said that they were going to throw him off of a cliff. Not a good first sermon experience. So I guess the question I'd really want to ask all of us, and I wonder who chose this text for the lectionary on the 4th of July. Go tell the nation of Israel, go tell the nation things they don't want to hear. Maybe something a little more patriotic, a little more bunting or fanfare. But as Jesus is talking, Mark doesn't tell us what he said to his hometown. So I would pose the question, if God were speaking to you individually, or Jesus came to your house today and sat you down at the kitchen table, what kind of things would Jesus tell you that would both support and encourage you, but what kind of things would Jesus tell you that you know are true about where you're at today in your faith journey that you probably don't want to hear? You really haven't spent real time with your family. You've neglected your friendships. You've gotten a little greedy. You need to be more faithful in your marriage. Whatever it is, what would it be that Jesus might say that might get you at first a little upset, but would be true? Because that's where both of these texts start. He's in the synagogue. What would Jesus have to say to us as a church? Say, yeah, you're good at these things, but you need some work here. You need some honest wrestling with this aspect of who you are as a faith community. And what would Jesus have to say to us as a nation? All the blessings, all the freedom, all the joys, but there's some shadow side too. Don't lose who you are as a people of faith and be blinded or wrap your patriotism in a way that becomes nationalistic and destructive and dark before God. Mark Twain, all of you have heard of Twain, Huck Finn and Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. During the Spanish-American War, when the United States went to war with Spain and eventually fought and acquired Cuba and Guam and the West Indies and later the Philippines, Mark Twain wrote a poem, a short story, and it's called The War Poem. I highly encourage you to read it at some point. And during the poem, he talks about all the fanfare of the army mobilizing, people sending their sons to battle, and fathers and mothers being proud, and sweethearts with high emotion, bands playing and fanfare as the soldiers depart. And then it moves into a scene in the church, and the preacher is preaching for the safety and protection of the troops, and that God would also help them to smite whoever they're going to fight, in this case, the Spanish. And Twain writes that a stranger interrupts the service, goes up to the pulpit while the preacher is still preaching one of the finest prayers the people had ever heard, and the stranger interrupts it and says, "I come from God," a prophetic voice. And the stranger says, "Please realize that you've prayed two prayers, one spoken for your troops and to destroy the enemies, but one unspoken." And he goes on to say, what is the unspoken prayer is against your neighbors who you've never met, and that you're going to pray that the widows and the motherless of the sons of the enemy who've been killed would wander their desolate land that you've annihilated. And it's a very poignant prayer that Twain never published. Why did he never publish it? Because he told his friends and his family members who encouraged him and said, Samuel, that's his real name, Samuel Clemens, if you publish this, you realize the kind of ire and anger that people will have that will say, this is very unpatriotic, even though there's a strong kernel of faith truth in it that we would be blinded to our neighbors in our zeal. And so it went unpublished until 25 years after, or I think it was 20 years after his death, in the 1920s that it was published. He wrote it in 1905, I believe. It's the first time he had shared it with his family. My point is that both with the prophet Ezekiel and with Jesus, and perhaps with somebody in your life who looks you straight in the eyes, and whether you've asked for the advice or not, says, listen, I have to be honest and truthful with you. Now, this isn't a blank check to just be brutal with somebody and hurt their feelings, nor is it's that balance between having the speck in your own eye and looking at, or speck in your brother's eye and looking at the log in your own or missing it. It is that place of truth-telling that says, listen, in the love of God, you've said this is who you want to be. At baptism, this is who you said you want to be before God. And I'm telling you that what I see by your actions and words is misaligned. And so in the midst of all our celebration and joy, in the midst of our patriotism and freedoms, I end with this question, as I think Mark would have done very ambiguously, as he just tells us Jesus read and talked to the crowd of his hometown synagogue. And at first they were astonished by the things he said. And then he said some things that really got in their gut, really got in their craw. Didn't make him very happy at first. In fact, it made him want to say, who do you think you are? Isn't this Mary's kid? So honestly, what is it that you and I might not want to hear that God has to tell us anyway? Not a message that is super joyful, but it is a message that we all might need if we're going to live more fully as children of light before God. May we be blessed in the wrestling. It's not a question I can answer for you. It may be different for each of us, but we do have some collective responsibility as well. So where is the Spirit speaking to us this day? Amen.